All right, let's go back to that story developing over the last hour. The Zimbabwean Constitutional Court dismissing the MDC Alliance's challenge to the election results and declaring with finality that Emmerson Mnangagwa has been duly elected president of that country. Let's get your reaction now and analysis. We have Africa analyst Gideon Chitanga joining us on the line. And Gideon, it appears that the MDC Alliance's challenge to the results fell flat on the basis that they failed to meet the required burden of proof in terms of Zimbabwean laws. Are you surprised?
I'm not really surprised, and for two reasons. First is the fact that the threshold of evidence required to overturn an election outcome in any country, but also the context of African countries, and particularly the context of Zimbabwe, would be so huge. And given all the challenges that the MDC as a party was facing, its lack of resources, and other technical and strategic issues, this was going to be such a huge, insurmountable mountain for the party. If you look at the judiciary system in Zimbabwe, it's a partisan bench largely, and even if there was going to be a very low modicum of goodwill, that to exploit that for the MDC, they would have needed such impeccable, indisputable evidence, so that those judges who are sympathetic, if there are any, to them would actually say, no, surely we have enough evidence to delegitimize the election. And I think that the Chief Justice referred to the need for primary evidence. And this is a very important point to take, because then if the MDC had managed to collect a lot of primary evidence in form of B11s, which should have been done by their agents, and presented that to a court, I think that this would not have been just an excuse, but a valid reason to say that we have enough primary evidence to dispute this outcome, and maybe that would have moved the case a bit.
In fact, that's exactly what I want to ask you there, Gideon, that is it not really a situation where, you know, people are sort of making excuses for the MDC's own performance, particularly in the legal case? The questions about them asking for a recount within 48 hours, which they had the right to do but chose not to, according to the Chief Justice, but also, more importantly, the questions that surfaced during the hearing part of the application, where they were being asked, why didn't you ask for the, the ballot boxes to be reopened? And of course, they presented the argument that said, basically by that time, the ballot boxes had already been contaminated in terms of their content. Did the MDC let themselves down in the way that they executed this particular court case?
So I would agree that the MDC should have done more, given that the party, which has a lot of lawyers and most of the best legal brains in Zimbabwe, are sympathetic to the party. But I think that they were pressed for time, they were pressed for resources, they were dealing with such a shocking loss, which was really very close. As to whether, as to what the explanation is for them, I would not want to hazard to guess what it is. But surely there is a lot the party could have done, even in terms of collecting the V11 forms, which are the primary evidence. The experience of the 2008 elections, which were disputed, should have been a learning starting point for the MDC. As a party, this is not a very new situation for them. So history has again judged the party harshly. Maybe we can say Nelson is a new candidate, but there's a lot the party could have benefited from by actually looking at everyone who was involved in 2008 and other cases of presidential elections challenge. For example, in 2002, when the late Morgan Tsvangirai challenged Robert Mugabe's victory. Those lessons could have actually helped in shaping up a very strong case and looking at the loopholes within the judiciary system and maybe strategizing around the way they were supposed to approach their case. However, I would not want to say they made excuses. The Zimbabwean law permits anyone who is dissatisfied to go to the court, and indeed they did. So they will have to deal with the results, and they will have to explain these results to the party supporters. Very important.
Right. So you're talking about dealing with the results. What the results have produced is in the coming days we will have Emmerson Mnangagwa sworn in and inaugurated as president of Zimbabwe for a substantive 5-year term in office. But it also means, Gideon, that you have a situation where ZANU-PF has this massive majority in parliament. What are the consequences of that combination?
In fact, I would wish that Mnangagwa does not overplay his advantage in terms of having a majority in parliament, but understands that what he has won today is legality and not necessarily legitimacy. And legitimacy is more important than legality, particularly in authoritarian regimes that are alleged or suspected to have floundered elections. So his democratic credentials are going to be tested again. His sense of nationhood for everybody and the idea of inclusivity will play in terms of how he's going to govern. The Zimbabweans would want to feel safe in terms of just being citizens in their country where they can express and freely relate to other institutions and other people. The international community and investors would want to feel happy to invest money into Zimbabwe, and it's a country that is facing serious financial and economic problems. So all these requires legitimacy more than legality. And I think that the ZANU-PF leadership, if it is serious, it will be asking itself very important, deep questions about how to move forward, to move the country forward post-Mugabe, following an election which did not necessarily resolve the long-term crisis or the immediate-term crisis, and which, in other words, has actually deepened and exposed the new regime which is coming into power. And for me, the way forward, instead of using parliament and all centers of power to turn against his opponents, Mnangagwa should be looking at dialogue, broad-based dialogue targeted at addressing the multiple issues that Zimbabwe is facing as its challenges right now.
Right, Gideon. So, I mean, let me ask you about the MDC again. It's nearly 20 years now since the party was established, right? And there was a point where it looked like the momentum was on their side, that they was gradually growing as a party and sort of gaining ground. And then we saw reversal. It started to suffer significant losses. Of course, they continued to question whether those were legitimate electoral outcomes. But 2013 and now these results, Morgan Tsvangirai is out of the picture. You've had the ructions that we have seen over a period of time. It begs the question, has the MDC moment passed?
I actually don't think that the MDC moment is passed. In my view, Zimbabwe is clearly a two-party dominant system. The MDC may not have necessarily achieved change in terms of removing ZANU-PF from power, but it has achieved a lot in terms of transforming Zimbabwe into a democratic country with a possible alternative in terms of a party that can govern. So that is important to note. The second thing is the MDC right now is going through its own transition. And we saw how the succession played out after the death of its founding president, Morgan Tsvangirai, on the 14th of February. So what I think is the leadership of the MDC has to reinvent itself, and reinventing a leadership is not necessarily replacing one leader with another. It's changing leaders or redeploying those who are there, or looking at the party as an institution and assessing how it stands since the 20 years that you have referred to. There are a lot of things that have changed. ZANU-PF, which party is what the MDC seeks to contest and remove it from power, has changed in so many ways. So the MDC has to readjust. The global regional, continental outlook has changed. So the MDC needs to consider that. Internally, I think that the MDC right now is very much divided, and the campaign towards the elections sort of covered up the cracks. So one thing that should immediately happen is for its national leadership to sit down, find each other, have a kind of a consensus or a trajectory going forward, agree on how they are going to relate to ZANU-PF and the government now that this constitutional case is over. So I think that, in short, the MDC has a very important role to play. And what makes it even more important is that a lot of Zimbabwe's young generation belong to the MDC. If you look at the votes that Chamisa got, it shows you that it is a party very much alive with a lot of support. But it must improve its internal democratic system and create enough space to accommodate different views. It must actually be way ahead of ZANU-PF in terms of creating a culture of internal debate.
Very quickly then, Gideon Chitanga, let me ask you then, we have President Emmerson Mnangagwa for the next 5 years, right? What does it mean for Zimbabwe? He has a message that says Zimbabwe is open for business, but at the same time, many of his critics are actually saying that, hey, how do you say that when you're facing a situation where, over the last few weeks, we saw soldiers on the ground in Zimbabwe, in Harare, firing live rounds on the streets of Harare, with the result that a number of people died. Lots of questions being asked about to what extent does it live the mantra of Zimbabwe is open for business and we've sort of put our past behind us and we're looking forward to a new future?
The intentions to open up the economy are very genuine. But what the ZANU-PF leaders must understand is that you cannot say you are opening up the economy without or outside addressing the broader fundamentals. I think that Mnangagwa needs to go to the basics, and going to the basics means understanding the basic problems in Zimbabwe. It's a country that is in a unique position in terms of its problems, where the economic challenges are part of a broader political crisis. So you can't deal with one without the others. And to be able to deal with all the challenges the country is facing in a holistic way, he would have to actually be magnanimous and engage not only the MDC, but different sections of society in its ethnic form, in its party political form, in its other forms. Talk to business, talk to those people who do not really identify with either the MDC or ZANU-PF, create dialogue that can deal with Ukurahundi and all the atrocious past. And also internally, ZANU-PF has to be seen to be seriously dealing with the residue of Mugabeism. That is, if those who are now leading the country today claim as they do that they are not part of the past system, they must be seen to be speaking to the past, to the systematic operation that Mugabe put in place, and to say that they are moving the Zimbabwean society in a collective way out of oppression to a more democratic economic and political dispensation.
Gideon Chitanga, thank you so much for those insights. Africa analyst Gideon Chitanga reacting to the outcome of that court case in Zimbabwe.